Also tonight, one of Hollywood's most memorable legends, Robert Duvall, has died. The Academy Award winner enjoyed a long and storied career, carving out a lane as both an unorthodox leading man and a supporting player in some of the greatest films in movie history.
Everyone thought they knew how the legendary Robert Duvall spent his final hours, and some called it a peaceful end to a 95-year journey. But at 54, his widow Luciana is finally shattering that polished Hollywood image. What exactly happened behind those closed doors in Middleburg during his final days? This confession is about to change everything we thought about the Godfather's right-hand man. While his legendary performances live forever, the physical presence of this icon has moved into history. Let's begin with the heartbreaking events that unfolded during the early hours of the day he passed. The final bow. On February 15, 2026, Hollywood lost one of its biggest pillars. At 95, Robert Duvall, the man who gave us some of the most iconic characters in film history, passed away at his home in Middleburg, Virginia. It was sort of a gentle end for a man who spent his life playing some of the toughest characters in film history. Unfortunately, the news of his death wasn't announced immediately. His wife, Luciana, made a very deliberate choice to keep the world at bay for 24 hours. She wanted to give the family a full day to breathe and process their grief without news cameras or social media blowing up their phones. When she finally released the official statement on February 16, 2026, the loss became real for everyone else. Luciana said though the world knew him as an Academy Award winner and a titan of the industry, to her he was simply everything. This sentence alone captured a 30-year love story that was much deeper than any movie role. Once the news was out, a massive wave of tributes started pouring in from the biggest names in the business. Francis Ford Coppola, who directed him in some of his most famous films, talked about his incredible talent. Al Pacino and other co-stars shared their own memories of working with a man many called the greatest actor of his generation. Social media was flooded with clips of his famous scenes. From the quiet intensity of Tom Hagen to the rugged wisdom of Gus McCrae. For a few hours, the internet felt like a massive memorial service for the man everyone called Bobby. You see, Robert Duvall spent most of his final years at Burnley, his historic 300-acre horse farm. This place was basically his sanctuary. While other stars of his age stayed in California, Robert preferred the rolling hills and the company of his horses. Also, at some point, people wondered if there was a secret illness or a tragic accident, especially since he was 95 years old. But his family was quick to clear that up, confirming he passed away from natural causes. It was simply time for a very long and very full life to come to its natural conclusion. While the world mourns a cinematic giant, many are looking back at the woman who stood by his side for 30 years. It all started with a chance meeting that sounds like a Hollywood script itself. Let's take a look at the woman who stood by the icon till his death. The bakery encounter. Back in 1996, in the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina, Robert was scouting locations for a film when he happened to walk past a local bakery, and this was exactly where he saw Luciana Pedraza. In a story that sounds almost too good to be true, he didn't use a popular pickup line or rely on his fame. He was just a man struck by the presence of a young woman who was vibrant and full of life. Luciana was only 24 at the time, and Robert was 65. To everyone, they were worlds apart because of the 41-year age gap, and as time went by, it became a talking point for the public. Many people were skeptical back then, wondering if such a massive difference in age could ever work for the long haul. When they got talking, Luciana went ahead to invite him to a party that weekend because she saw him as a person rather than a celebrity. This act alone gave their relationship a foundation of honesty that is rare in the entertainment world. In that party, they quickly found a shared language through the Argentine tango. This dance is all about connection, rhythm, and trust, and it became the heartbeat of their bond. They spent hours dancing together, and it was clear to anyone watching that their connection went far beyond a simple friendship. As time went on, Luciana began to see the depth of the man she was dating. She shifted from knowing him as her partner to becoming a genuine fan of his work. She watched him transform into characters like the one in The Apostle, and she started to understand why he was considered a master of his craft. They dated for nearly a decade before they decided to make things official. In 2005, they had a very quiet, low-key wedding. It wasn't a massive media event with hundreds of guests. It was a private promise to keep building the life they had already started. For Robert, this was a fresh start after 3 previous marriages that had ended in divorce. It seemed as though Luciana brought a sense of stability and calm that he had been missing for a long time. Surprisingly, the icon's wife later admitted something that most people found hard to believe. She revealed that she actually had no idea who Robert Duvall was when they first met. Lucinda wasn't starstruck because she hadn't seen his Oscar-winning performances or followed his career in Hollywood. She also said that Robert always thinks she is joking each time she mentions that. Eventually, their relationship grew into a true partnership of equals. Luciana didn't just sit on the sidelines while Robert worked. She stepped into the world of production and even acted alongside him. She became his constant companion on the red carpet, but she was also the person who managed the details of his daily life so he could focus on his passion. She was the one who finally tamed the restless spirit of a man who had spent decades searching for the right partner. They proved the skeptics wrong by staying together for 30 years, showing that a connection built on shared passions like the tango could outlast any age gap. But their life wasn't only about red carpets and tango. It was a deeply private existence tucked away in the Virginia countryside, far from the prying eyes of Los Angeles. Life at Burnley. Now, you might be wondering why the couple decided to live very far from everyone. But then Robert and Luciana chose that 300-acre estate called Burnley in Middleburg, Virginia, for a very specific reason. Just like we said earlier, while most actors his age were busy trying to stay relevant in Beverly Hills, Robert wanted a real life. He wanted to wake up to the sound of nature instead of traffic. This farm became his sanctuary, a place where he could finally step out of the characters he played and just be himself. Life on the farm followed a steady, comfortable rhythm. Robert earned the nickname of a country gentleman among those who knew him best. His daily routine was a far cry from the chaos of a movie set. He spent his mornings riding his horses and his afternoons sitting on the porch reading through new scripts. He was a man who appreciated the simple things, like a perfectly cooked steak or a quiet walk across his land. This lifestyle kept him grounded and gave him the peace he needed to keep working well into his 90s. Let's talk about his wife, Luciana. This woman played a massive role in making his peaceful life possible. She wasn't only his partner, she was the one who managed the estate and kept the gears turning. She took over the daily stresses of running a massive farm so Robert could focus on his health and his creativity. Because of her, his later years were incredibly productive and free of the usual Hollywood drama. Also, in 2001, the couple focused a lot of their energy on giving back. Together, they ran the Robert Duvall Children's Fund. This foundation did vital work for the needy families in South America, providing everything from healthcare to education. It was a project close to their hearts, and they often preferred talking about the kids they helped rather than the movies Robert had made. In the small town of Middleburg, Robert wasn't treated like a legendary movie star. The locals always called him Bob. He was a neighbor who cared about the community and respected the local way of life. He would show up at local events or grab a meal at a nearby spot without any fanfare. This mutual respect allowed him to live a normal life that would have been impossible in California. Also, animals were another huge part of that life. Robert and Luciana shared a deep devotion to their horses and dogs. In his final months, Luciana noted that these animals were among his greatest comforts. They provided a silent companionship that meant the world to him as he slowed down. Even with the quiet farm life, they never lost the spark that brought them together in Argentina. It wasn't uncommon for them to clear the furniture in the farmhouse living room for a late-night tango session. This shared passion kept their bond strong for decades. However, being a famous couple meant they still had to deal with the rumor mill as usual, right? In 2016, stories started circulating that Robert Duvall had suffered a stroke. Luciana moved quickly to protect his privacy, shutting down the gossip and ensuring his medical history stayed out of the tabloids. She was his fiercest defender, making sure that the world only saw what Robert wanted them to see. Later that year, at the Howard Stern show, Luciana debunked Robert's stroke rumor, saying, "He's still grumpy as always, but that's it." However, protecting that privacy became a full-time job as Robert entered his 90s, especially as the physical toll of a legendary career began to show. What exactly happened to Robert Duvall? The health journey? One thing about the iconic actor is that he never saw himself as a fragile senior actor who needed to rest because he was getting old. Robert Duvall looked at aging the same way he looked at taking a difficult movie role. Even as his mobility slowed down, he flatly refused to use the word retirement. He famously believed that once an actor stops moving, the end isn't far behind. This mindset is exactly why we saw him still working perfectly on major projects like the 2022 film Hustle in his 90s. Unfortunately, the years of long days on film sets and riding horses eventually began to catch up with his body. While he was physically moving a bit slower, his routine remained remarkably strict. Robert was a big believer in the simple things. He stayed away from processed junk and stuck to a diet of basic foods like steak and fresh vegetables. He spent years lifting weight, playing tennis, and horseback riding, not to build big muscles, but to keep his lower body strong and in shape. He often told people that when you lose the ability to walk, everything else goes downhill fast. And because of this, he stayed on his feet as much as possible, even when every step required a bit more effort than the day before. As always, his wife, Luciana, became the primary guardian of his health and his spirit. She wasn't just his wife. She was the person who ensured his mind stayed as sharp as a blade. Through her care, he remained mentally present and engaged with the world until the very end. For his 95th birthday in January 2026, she put together a touching video filled with photos of him as a young boy. It was a private, small celebration at the farm, far away from the whole chaos of Hollywood. Even at 95, Robert took to social media to thank his fans, showing the world that he was still the same sharp-witted man they had always loved. It's exactly why when the end finally came in February, his family was very sure there was no secret illness or long battle with a hidden disease. They wanted to shut down the rumors of strokes or mystery ailments immediately. It was so clear that he died of natural causes. His heart had done its job for nearly a century, and it was finally time for it to rest. Luciana later shared that he was still holding court and telling stories with his trademark intensity just days before he passed. He didn't fade away in a fog of confusion. He stayed himself until the clock simply ran out. There is an emotional story from his final week at Burnley. Robert took one last walk out toward the pastures to look at his horses. He didn't stay out for long, but he took a moment to breathe in the life he had built, far away from the movie studios. It was his final outdoor appearance on the farm before he retreated indoors for his last few days of rest. But despite the physical decline, the fire in his eyes never faded. A fire that was lit 7 decades ago when he first stepped onto a film set. Let's rewind back to how Robert Duvall first broke into Hollywood during the Golden Era. Building a Titan. In 1962, a young Robert Duvall walked onto a movie set for the first time to play one of the most mysterious characters in Hollywood. He played Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. Most actors want a lot of lines for their big debut, yet Robert did not say a single word. For that role, he stood in the shadows and had this mysterious stare that resonated with people for generations. It was a risky move for an upcoming actor, but he proved right away that he could tell a whole story simply by standing still and using his eyes. This immediately became his signature because he did not need to shout to be the most interesting person in the room. However, before that big break, life was anything but easy for him. Robert was a struggling actor in New York City who shared a tiny, cramped apartment with two other guys who were also looking for the same job. Those roommates were Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman. They were all broke and worked odd jobs to pay the rent, yet they spent their free time studying under a legendary teacher named Sanford Meisner. Meisner taught them that acting was about living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. This training shaped the unfussy style Robert used for the rest of his life. He did not believe in the excessive drama of typical movie stars. He only wanted to be real. He and his roommates would sit around dreaming of the future, never knowing they would all eventually become some of the greatest legends in history. By the 1970s, Robert became a major force in the movie industry. He landed the role of Tom Hagen in The Godfather, playing the calm lawyer for the Corleone family. He was the anchor in a world of chaos. When it came time to make the third movie years later, Robert did something very few people in Hollywood would do. He walked away because he found out that Al Pacino was being offered a massive salary while he was being offered much less. He told the director that he would work for half of what Pacino made, yet not 3 or 4 times less. He knew his worth and chose his dignity over a big paycheck. Fortunately, Robert had a way of stealing scenes even when he was not the main star. In Apocalypse Now, he played Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore, a surfing officer who famously loved the smell of napalm in the morning. He wore a cowboy hat in the middle of a war zone and acted with terrifyingly calm confidence. This role earned him an Oscar nomination and solidified his reputation as an actor's actor. Other professionals watched him to learn how to turn a small part into the most memorable thing on screen. He was a total chameleon. One year he was a soft-spoken country singer in Tender Mercies, which won him his Academy Award. The next, he was a cold Manhattan businessman in the movie network. Throughout his 7-decade career, Robert worked with the biggest names in the business. He collaborated with Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. Sometimes the work was tense because Robert demanded honesty in every scene. He had no patience for anything that felt fake. He mastered the art of acting without speaking, a skill he kept well until his very last days in Virginia. He understood that the best moments on film often happen in the silences between the words. But of all his masterpieces, there was one project so personal he had to fund it himself, and it would eventually make him work with the love of his life. The director's vision. As a restless person, Robert Duvall was never content with just being a face on a poster. He wanted to be the one who decided how a story was told, and this desire led to one of the biggest gambles in Hollywood history. For 13 years, Robert tried to get studios to back a film he wrote called The Epistle. However, every single one of them said no. They didn't think a movie about a flawed, shouting preacher would sell tickets. Instead of giving up, Robert did something that made people think he was crazy. He took $5 million of his own money and paid for the entire production himself. It was a massive risk that could have wiped him out, but he didn't care about the money. He cared about displaying his story to the world. When the movie finally hit screens in 1997, it became an instant classic. His performance as Sonny Dewey was so intense and real that it felt more like a documentary than a piece of fiction. He didn't just play the role, he inhabited it. This project proved that he didn't need the permission of big studios to create something great. It also set the stage for his next big step as a director. In 2002, he directed and starred in Assassination Tango, a film that allowed him to bring his real-life partner, Luciana, onto the screen. Working together on a professional level only made their personal bond stronger. They weren't just a couple, they became a creative team. Together, they ran Butcher's Run Films, a production company with a very simple mission: They wanted to tell authentic, gritty stories that the Hollywood machine usually ignored. Robert preferred the freedom of independent filmmaking because it allowed him to keep total creative control. He didn't want a board of executives telling him how to edit a scene or which actors to hire. This independence became the hallmark of his later career. He chose projects based on how honest they felt, rather than how much they would pay. This was the period where he truly became a mentor to the next generation of talent. Even though he lived far away in Virginia, young actors would often make the trip to his farm just to sit and listen to him talk. He believed young actors are better and taking over Hollywood in this era. Robert would hold acting clinics right in his living room, teaching them that the most important thing an actor can do is listen. He told them to stop trying so hard and to just be themselves. He believed that the best moments on camera happened when an actor forgot the cameras were even there. To him, acting was about being as lifelike as possible and mixing professional actors with real people who had never been on a set before. In the final years of his life, rumors began to swirl about one last script he was working on with Luciana. While it was never produced, those close to the family say it was a deeply personal story about the passing of time and the beauty of the countryside. He was still refining those pages until just days before the end. Luciana often reflected on how Robert never lied when the red light of the camera was on. He brought that same level of honesty to his directing style, always looking for that one perfect, unscripted moment that felt real. He left behind a legacy of authenticity that very few in the history of cinema will ever be able to match. And that authenticity translated into a massive financial legacy, one that Luciana is now tasked with managing as the primary heir to his estate. The Duval fortune. When you look at his net worth, Robert Duvall didn't just leave behind a little amount. He left behind a fortune estimated at roughly $50 to $70 million. For a man who lived solely on his farm, that amount might surprise some people. However, you have to remember that Robert was a master of his craft for over 60 years. He wasn't the kind of actor who blew his paychecks on the reigning cars or temporary trends. Instead, he invested in things that lasted, starting with the very ground he walked on in Virginia. The crown jewel of his holdings is undoubtedly Burnley, that 300-acre estate in Middleburg. In today's market, a historic farm of that size, in such a sought-after area, is worth a huge amount of money. It is more than just land. It is a piece of American history that has only grown in value since he bought it decades ago. Along with the farm, the estate includes various other properties and investments that have quietly hummed along in the background while Robert focused on his acting. This solid foundation of real estate means that the family's financial future is anchored in something much more stable than the unpredictable stock market. Then there is the matter of the movies. Every time a television network airs a classic like The Godfather or Apocalypse Now, a royalty check is generated. Because Robert starred in so many films that have become permanent parts of American culture, those residuals add up to a significant stream of ongoing income. Even projects like Lonesome Dove continue to bring in money years after they were filmed. These royalties now belong to the estate, providing big proof of the massive footprint he left on the world of entertainment. His wife, Luciana, is the person who will oversee these accounts, ensuring that his professional legacy continues to be handled with the same care they shared during their entire years of marriage. A unique aspect of this estate is the fact that Robert never had children. Often in Hollywood, the death of a major star leads to a long and messy battle between heirs. But that won't happen here. Robert made his intentions very clear long ago that he didn't want children. And by choosing not to have kids, he simplified the entire process of passing down his wealth. Luciana stood by his side for 30 years, and she was his primary partner in both life and business. This long history of trust means there is no Hollywood will drama waiting to explode in the tabloids. Insiders expect the transition to be handled quietly and with total dignity. Part of that inheritance is also designated for the causes they both loved. Robert was deeply committed to giving back, and a good portion of his wealth is expected to go toward the Robert Duvall Children's Fund. This charity has been a lifeline for impoverished families in South America for a long time. By funding these programs, his money will continue to change lives, even though he is no longer here to see it. There is also the question of Butcher's Run, their production company. Luciana has been a driving force there for years, and many expect her to keep the company's mission alive by telling the kind of gritty, authentic stories Robert was known for. Money aside, the true inheritance Robert leaves behind isn't in a bank account. It is in the hearts of the colleagues who stood in awe of him for 50 years. The Duval Code: why he never became a Hollywood statistic. Robert Duvall was famous for being a no-nonsense man and having zero patience for the fluff and ego that usually comes with being a movie star. He didn't have a glam squad or a fleet of assistants. Most of the time, he was his own driver. This grounded way of living is exactly what allowed him to keep his edge, while other actors his age started to feel like caricatures of themselves. He was often called the actor's actor, a title that meant he was the one the professionals watched to learn how the job was really done. This reputation for being real started back in that New York apartment he shared with Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman. They were known as the Three Musketeers of the acting world, but Robert was always the one who stayed the most stoic. While the others might have enjoyed the spotlight, Robert preferred the craft. He famously said that he didn't want to play a character, he wanted to be the character. This meant doing things like spending weeks in the South to perfect an accent, or learning how to actually work a ranch for a Western role. He believed that the audience could smell a lie from a mile away, and he made it his life's mission to never tell one on screen. His relationship with the industry was always a bit complicated. He loved the work, but he often felt like a bit of an outsider. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, even if it meant bumping heads with powerful directors. He once told a story about how he and Marlon Brando would spend time on the set of The Godfather, just trying to outact each other in the gentlest ways possible. He didn't need to chew the scenery or have the loudest lines to be the most memorable person in a scene. That confidence is what made him a pillar of American cinema. He was the guy who could say more with a slight nod of his head than most actors could with a 5-minute monologue. In his final years, this authenticity translated into a legacy that felt more like a masterclass for the next generation. Young actors like Robert Downey Jr. often spoke about how Duvall was the benchmark for a career well-lived. He showed them that you could be a titan of the industry without living in a glass house in Los Angeles. As it stands now, Robert Duvall will continue to remain an immovable pillar of American cinema. He was definitely the eternal cowboy who stayed true to his roots and his craft until the very end. What would you miss about this legendary actor? Tell us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. To enjoy more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.